Lots of Albuquerque residents are talking about crime, especially downtown these days. The tech company Lavoo recently sent a letter to Mayor Richard Berry and Governor Martinez raising concerns about crime and issues around their office on Central and First, which is right across from the Transportation Center. If you haven't spent much time in the area, there's a noticeable number of people who are homeless and panhandling, and often folks who were recently released from the Metropolitan Detention Center as well. And people are visibly struggling. It happens in every city, but it can be a tough place to walk in certain times of the day. I even avoid it sometimes, and I live downtown. And we've reached these issues. Have they reached a critical point? And crime downtown is part of the quality of life and economic development efforts across the entire city, certainly. Let's get into this one now with our line opinion panelists. I'm joined this week by former State Senator Dee Dee Feldman, former House Minority Whip Daniel Foley is here, Tom Garrity from the Garrity Group PR, and Laura Sanchez-Rivey, an attorney at Cuddy and McCarthy LLP. And Laura, let me starting with you. The Lavoo letter has really lit off something. It's not as if these issues were new to folks that are downtown, but I think for a lot of folks outside of downtown, it may have struck folks a little bit new. Do you have a sense of, you've been in and out of downtown in different capacities in your work life. What's your sense of where we are now with downtown and crime?
So, I did work downtown for a number of years, and I lived downtown when I first moved to Albuquerque in 2004. So I enjoy going downtown. My sense of it, having come from Los Angeles and other big metropolitan areas, was that it wasn't as bad as people thought it was. People who tend to hit other parts of the city. My husband, for example, who grew up in the Heights and had this concept that the downtown was terrible. Right. But he also had had vivid recollections of the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, where it really was really sketchy, in his words, back then. And I think now you see a lot of panhandlers. I do think that there's a lot more people because it's concentrated than other areas. But having lived down there and worked down there, I never really felt afraid. Like I didn't fear for anything. And when we go down there, there are a lot of other people who are, you visibly see people who are homeless or folks who are panhandling, but I don't really have a sense of fear about that. I don't think it's a crime issue. Right. I just think that because of the way our transit system is set up, where we do have a transportation center down there, both train and bus, and we just have a concentration of people, it makes it more likely that there's people walking around down there that have some other issues going on. But I just don't see it as a major crime-infested area. I think we have a disproportionate amount of crime in Albuquerque in general. Right. A lot of it being property crime, and I think there's economic issues for that. But I don't really see that there's that much of a problem with that area.
Fair enough, and a lot of folks would agree with you on that. And Tom, interestingly, there's a sense out there that things are out of balance because we have lost a ton of jobs downtown over the last decade or so, 15,000 as a matter of fact. And what that's done is it's taken off the streetscape of regular people going hither and yon, and it just seems like there's a lot more homeless folks sort of dominating the area. Now, you had your office in that same building for a little while as well. What's your sense of it, at the situation we're in now?
Yeah, well, actually, when I started my company 20 years ago, we were actually in First Plaza.
Oh, okay.
And so,
I remember that. That's right.
Tom Carroll Strategies is over in the building where Lavoo is. Albuquerque Business First is, or was, right. Until they bolted to the uptown area. Right. And the reasons that I moved was more out of convenience. But if I don't have to go to the downtown area, I'm not going to. And that's really not good from an economic development perspective. Not because I'd spend money there, but because you want people going down to the downtown area, and the flight of 15,000 jobs definitely has a negative impact. I compare it to what downtown Houston was like, many years ago, and it was just really a bad place to be. There was a lot of homelessness, a lot of panhandling, and a lot of crime as well. Now what's happened is they've had the jobs come back, and as the jobs came back, the social norm really became less on panhandling and homelessness, and the city actually had resources where they could address it. I think the same thing is here. As soon as New Mexico and Albuquerque specifically pulls out of this, almost decades-long recession, then the issue of homelessness, panhandling, and crime, which is very much a top issue amongst Albuquerque residents. That's when I think you'll start to see that tide change.
That's interesting point you make there, and Dee Dee, in that Lavoo letter, there were some very specific examples of that walk between First and going down to that parking garage. It's just one block. Right. But boy, I tell you, I've seen some crazy stuff in that one block, and you see women clutching their purses, and there's been, in the Lavoo letter, smash and grab incidents in the garage and people's vehicles and stuff. the city's response to these kind of things. I mean, we have an obligation from the city to sort of keep up with this kind of stuff. Has this been on par with what we've got going on here, or could they be doing better at this point?
Well, the latest response is the mayor is getting an award this evening for public service for how he's handled, crime and everything in his administration. And I think, anybody who has walked from that parking garage to the movie theater knows what it's like.
That's right.
And, there are solutions to this. Downtown has suffered from a bad rap for decades, and every mayor has tried to do something about it, from Jim Baca forward. And, it doesn't help to cut the police department and to have fewer officers patrolling that area.
That's right.
It seems like the parking garage is a big problem. Well, there needs to be attention given to that. And if this is where they're dropping off people who have been released from jail, well, that can be changed as well. So, I think that there are policy answers to this, but it's going to take some money, and it's going to take some attention to root causes. And root causes are, why do we have so many homeless people, so many mentally ill people? They're out on the streets, and they're there in that location for reasons.
A good point there. Dan, I mean, like I said, you see me walking downtown, you go to your office.
I used to have an office down there.
That's right, that's right. It's amazing what the perception, going back to Laura's point, if you live down there, there's one perception, but if you don't, there's a whole other perception altogether. And you've witnessed some things too, and your kids have witnessed some stuff, and you were telling us a little bit story earlier. Tell us about that. That was a fascinating...
My son was down there with his girlfriend at the time and a couple of friends. They walked out of a club. They were walking back to their car to parking lot down on Central. Two guys ran past them, through them, and kind of turned the corner. Another guy came walking and said, "Excuse me." They went around the corner. As they came around the corner, that guy shot those two guys, and then ran back past my son and the folks that were with him and got in a car and took off. And the police were there within a few seconds. But look, yeah, that's a bad thing. Albuquerque's a big city. I mean, whether we like to say it's a town. I mean, it's 800,000+ people. It's the epicenter of the state of New Mexico. I mean, I think it's fair to give comparisons to LA and New York, even though it's a smaller example. Those are major metropolitan areas. In New Mexico, that is the metropolitan area. I loved having my office downtown. I'd go back downtown. I enjoyed it. I liked the restaurants, being able to walk. I like the feel of getting up in the morning and feeling like I'm going to work, that you don't really feel like when you're not in a downtown area. I think there's a much deeper problem. I'm not going to rehash the whole mental illness. We've talked about that ad nauseum. I mean, I've said here many times. I've traveled. I've businesses all over the country, and I think we have an inordinate number of mentally ill homeless people in Albuquerque for the size of the city compared to major cities I've been to. They all have homeless problems, but we seem to have an inordinate number of folks that are homeless that are mentally ill right here in Albuquerque. That's one conversation. The other conversation is, instead of us running around downtown and putting a bus lane down the center of Central, how about, we lost Sony from downtown because they didn't have the infrastructure to take care of that digital work that those guys need to do. People don't realize that if you're not within a couple blocks of certain buildings, you're still like on dial-up internet in places down there. I mean, it's why not go down there and turn downtown into a information superhighway that every high-tech business should be at. There's a reason why these guys are, when Fidelity comes and all these other people come with these call centers and that none of those people are going in these huge empty buildings that are downtown. It's not because the cost of the rent, because they're paying more money to be out in these mega buildings somewhere else. It's because the infrastructure is not in place for them to just plug in and start working. And if you really want to see a change downtown, there's got to be more done than putting a bus lane down the center of Central, slapping some paint.
Straight?
Oh, I think we're totally off.
Totally off on these things.
I think there are the public's priorities, and then there's the priorities of whoever happens to be in office. And that's not just the mayor's office; it's also city council. And it just seems as if nobody can. There's no middle ground, as far as how to address the issue. Everybody has, what's going to help their specific area, but nobody's really looking out for the overall good of Albuquerque, and that's unfortunate. You have a lot of people who say that they are, and we have a lot of mayoral candidates who say that they are. But issues of crime and homelessness, we have ABQ heading home.
That's right.
And I know that that's a long-term program, so some might view this as a cheap shot, but you know what? There really needs to be, it's not just all in one program, it's a number of different nonprofit organizations, from Joy Junction to Noonday to New Day rather. And you have all these organizations, and what's the city doing, or what's government doing in general, to let the nonprofits be the nonprofits and to provide the service that they're really good at providing, because the city so far has not been really effective at doing that.
That's a good point. There's a NIMBY issue in these things as well. For years nobody wanted to have these services downtown and just let this whole thing sort of fester. Maybe this is the thing that gets us going with a new mayor coming in October. You know what I mean? This could be the thing that just kind of, Lavou's letter could be the thing that just really gets us going.
Well, I mean, it's certainly fair game for all the candidates. I mean, it's something to talk to the mayoral candidates about and really flesh out whether they have some very specific ideas and whether they have, a plan for how to address some of these concerns.
That's right.
But I do think that, my office was right at the corner of Gold and First and Gold. And I was on the second floor, and I could look down and see the transit center and see everything. I don't think there was a disproportionate. I worked late hours while I was there. I don't think there was a disproportionate number of criminal incidents. You just see a lot more people who are, homeless or vagrant or panhandling or whatever. But I did see a couple of incidents of crime happening, fights mostly, and other things.
Yeah.
But
Big city stuff, right?
Yeah, stuff like that. But I think that what what Dan was talking about us having a disproportionate amount of mentally ill, homeless. I don't necessarily think that there's more of them. I think that we have less services to address some of those issues. I think a lot of other cities prioritize some of their funds so that they do get services and they're able to provide treatment, whereas I think that we just have, we're in a crisis situation here on that front.
And Gene, but I think before we go, I think you got to touch the letter from Lavou. It's a huge problem. That's a locally grown tech company that's talking about leaving. If you're not from Albuquerque and you're thinking of moving, I'm done. I'm pulling the plug. You got a guy that grew a business from the ground up in your city that now says, I'm out. Why would I think of relocating from Seattle?
I'm glad you got that in. That's a very good point. Absolutely right. When we come back to the line, we'll talk about addressing behavioral health needs across New Mexico.